Yes.
We sure can.
Great. Okay, then let's get started. So hello, I'm Tobias. I'm one of the co-organizers of the Landmark Recognition Challenge, which I'm now going to discuss together with my colleague Cam. So this year we had the third edition already of the Recognition Challenge, Time Sure Flies. The challenge is actually still ongoing and will end in 1 month, so it's not too late to join. But already we have 430 participants, which is already more than twice of what we had last year. And also we're happy that we can again provide $25,000 in prize money, which is going to be split among the top 3 participants. And notably this year, we introduced a completely new format for this challenge, which I'm going to discuss later. But first of all, let me talk about the general task. So the task is landmark recognition, which means given an image, so any image, recognize the landmark in the image if there is any. So that means if there is none, we also don't want a label. And for example, here, the images that are highlighted in red, these shouldn't be labeled. The metric that we use is global average precision, or also called micro AP. Yeah, you can refer to the Google Landmarks Dataset V2 paper above for more details on how this metric works and how it's evaluated. So for the data of the competition, there was a public training data set, which is based on the Google Landmarks Dataset V2 clean. So a cleaned version of the original training set that was provided by Team Smuliaka, the winners of last year's retrieval challenge. And for the evaluation data, we collected a new test data set, which has similar characteristics as the one from Google Landmarks Dataset V2. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges of this competition. So one challenge is that the class distribution is extremely long-tailed, which kind of emerges when you collect data from social media or generally from like crowdsourcing. Since there's a few landmarks in the world that are super popular and that attract all the attention. These also get all the photos. These are the ones here in the graph on the left side. And then there's a lot of local landmarks, many more, but they don't have so much attention, so there's very, very few photos of these. And this leads, of course, to a highly imbalanced training problem and to some needle in the haystack problems when it comes to retrieval. And then another challenge is the intra-class variability. I mean, obviously landmarks are rigid objects, and this is instance level, as Andre mentioned in the introduction. So you don't have to deal with cats, for example, that have different appearances, but you do have photos that show the whole place, photos that show only a detail of its architecture, or photos inside and outside. So there's quite some variation that you need to bridge, and there's kind of these pseudo like visual clusters, so to say, within each actual class. So before I talk about this year's challenge, I actually want to go back to the challenge from last year to motivate the choices that we made for this year. So last year, the recognition challenge worked as follows. So you would first download the test and the training data sets, and then typically you would go and train a model, build a retrieval index, do some other techniques like database augmentation, etc. Extract local and global features, whatever you want basically. And you perform recognition of the evaluation images offline because they were given to you. And then you would write the results, which consist of the most likely label and the confidence of that label, into a CSV file that you upload to Kaggle. And there it would get scored with the private ground truth. Okay, my apologies. I just realized that this slide was swapped with the previous one. So let me quickly switch everyone's context and go back to the data set. As I mentioned, the challenge data is based on the Google Landmarks Dataset V2, and this is fully available now. Since the challenge of last year is over, we released the full ground truth, so you can use it in your own work and run the original benchmarks without relying on Kaggle. So you can train landmark embeddings with it, or evaluate landmark recognition and retrieval approaches. And also notably, this year, I wanted to mention that we just released a new browser for this data set that you can use to visually explore it by both geography and by place. Okay, sorry about this mix-up. So let's switch context back to the challenge of last year. So here are the winner teams, the top 3 of last year, and the approaches that they used. So I'm not going to go into details on what they exactly did, but they all used the recognition by retrieval paradigm, which means that they basically did image retrieval to find similar images from the training set to a query, and then use their labels to infer the query's labels. So this seems to suggest that classification is maybe not the most suitable approach for this kind of really large scale and long-tailed recognition problem. And yeah, otherwise everyone used ensembles of several models typically, some form of data set cleaning. Retrieval was usually done by combining first a global feature search followed by local feature verification, and often some other forms of re-ranking, query expansion, what have you. Okay, so just to go into a bit of the lessons learned or the takeaways from last year. So we were glad to see that there was a lot of innovation going on, and a lot of diverse approaches were used. And we saw actually quite a strong improvement over the baselines we originally had. But we also felt that these approaches were often rather complex. I mentioned there were, for example, heavy embeddings and lots of tricks used that made these approaches both complex to implement and computationally expensive. And also there was some advantage for teams that may not have as much computing power at their disposal, because they obviously could run more training and try out more complex techniques. And finally, there was a potential for cheating. So actually, this really happened in the retrieval challenge. The winner, or the original winner, was disqualified because they had mined Wikipedia comments and obtained the original image labels and then used this to their advantage, which obviously wasn't really the goal of the challenge, so they got disqualified. But this year we wanted to prevent that from the start and just try to not have to deal with this kind of situation again. Okay, so basically here are the motivations that we had for this year's challenge. We wanted to focus on efficient solutions. We wanted to introduce some new challenges because we saw that the data set was already, there was some good progress towards the metrics of the data set. And finally, we wanted to reduce the risk of cheating. So for the first two, we decided to standardize the runtime environment, and Cam is going to talk about what that actually looked like. And then finally, we wanted to reduce the risk of cheating, which we did by collecting, first of all, a new set of test data and then keeping that private so that the participants actually couldn't access it. Okay, but with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Cam, who is going to talk a bit more about the data and the challenge format.
There we go. Thanks, Tobias. So now that we've talked a little bit about the challenge at a high level, I'm going to go into more detail. And specifically, I'm going to start out by talking about this year's challenge data and how we collected it. We publicly released the ground truth of GLD v2 last year, so we couldn't use that for a challenge this year. Then we'd run into the same cheating sort of issues that we had last year. So we had to collect new data. And since the Kaggle submission pipeline has limited time and resources, we had to limit the amount of test and index data that we used as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, fans. There we go. As Tobias mentioned before, the data for this challenge is split into two different parts. on the left, we have a box representing the available data to participants during development. And on the right, we represent the evaluation data, which is only available to the kernel or the code, the notebook that people write during submission. The development data includes a training data set, which is GLDV2 clean, training specifically. And besides this data, it's also fair game to train on whatever public data set you want, as long as this is disclosed to other participants. Next, please. We also released a test set of 10,000 images. This test set is meant only to mock the evaluation data and is not used for scoring or ranking on the leaderboard for the competition. All of the development data is available in Kaggle datasets directly, so participants don't have to download it to their machines to get started with the challenge. The evaluation data on the right provides a training set of 100,000 images. This is a subset of GLDV2 clean. And next, please. The test set consists of 10,000 images. 33% of this was used to compute the scores on the public leaderboard, giving participants faster feedback on how their model performed. And 67% is held back for the private leaderboard and used to determine final team rankings that are only shown after the challenge ends. And it's important to note that there is no overlap here between the test set in development and in evaluation on the right. Next slide, please. There we go. So now that you're a little bit more familiar with the data used to train and evaluate submissions for the competition, let's take a look at the format of the competition itself. In contrast to the challenge that we talked about in the previous session, where participants simply submitted models that are run in a retrieval pipeline that we actually developed, the recognition challenge calls for participants to develop their own recognition algorithm in a Kaggle notebook. This allows for participants to use libraries, frameworks, and supplemental data of their choice, and importantly, to take advantage of those more advanced and diverse approaches to the problem. Next, please. So while the algorithms themselves might be diverse and sophisticated within constraints, conceptually, the submission workflow for this challenge is really simple. Participants just write notebooks that make predictions on the challenge dataset, and then those notebooks get run on a Kaggle VM, and then our scoring code just calculates the global average precision, like Tobias was discussing earlier. Next. So here are some of the resource constraints that are present on the Kaggle VM itself. So everybody's given a Tesla NVIDIA P100 GPU to work with. And because of this, we limited the CPU to 2 cores, down from the 4, which are like Kaggle wide if you're not using a GPU acceleration. And people have 13 gigabytes of RAM available to them, down from, I think, the normal 16. They also don't have internet access, which further reduces cheating. And they have a max 9-hour, actually, that's wrong, my bad. They have a max 12-hour runtime, up from the max of 9 across the rest of Kaggle. We increased it to allow, again, for those advanced algorithms and approaches, and a max of 5 submissions per day per team. Next slide. So because participants were required to write their own pipeline and algorithm for recognition, we thought it would be helpful to share a baseline or example notebook to help them get started. The notebook that we published it features pre-trained model loading, specifically using Delg, the model pictured here. It has image similarity retrieval using global features, same as in the previously discussed challenge. And then it uses geometric verification and ransack and liar re-ranking using the other output from the Delg network, which is local features. It also showcases how to traverse the dataset and generate files for submission. Next slide, please. This is the current status of the challenge. So we've got really good participation so far. And as of, I'd say like 3 days ago, oh, there we go. As of about 3 days ago, we have over 250 teams who have beaten the baseline. So a lot of teams actually just like submitted the baseline kind of as a hello world, and as you can see, like a lot of people are improving on that baseline, which is, we think, a really strong one. We hope as the competition continues to see more and more people moving to the right of that line and even farther away from it. Next slide, please. So in summary, we've presented a new challenge format, a code competition, with a stronger focus on efficient methods, featuring computational and time constraints so that we can get more practical and pragmatic solutions. You can participate in the challenge at the link here, and the deadline for that is September 29th, so about a month to go. We have 430 teams participating so far, which is significantly up from the 178 that we had last year. And next slide. And now we can move on to questions if you guys have any. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think we have plenty of time. And as I mentioned earlier, we can take questions on both the recognition and retrieval challenge.
While we wait for questions, maybe one thing that is interesting to mention in the landmark retrieval and recognition challenges this year is that in the previous two editions, both challenges were in sync. They had the same start date, they had the same end date. But this year, we have the recognition challenge running for 1 month longer after the retrieval challenge ended. So to some extent, we kind of know what the secret sauce was for the team that won the retrieval challenge. And that team will even make the code open source in order to claim the prize of the retrieval challenge. So that will actually quite raise the bar quite a bit for the recognition challenge. I think the last time I saw that team, the team that won the retrieval challenge, is actually leading the recognition as well. But now that everybody knows what their secret was, hopefully we'll see even more innovative solutions coming up.
Yeah, this plays nicely into the recognition by retrieval paradigm. Basically, people first solve retrieval and then build on top of that to solve recognition. So yeah, we are really curious to see what comes out. And well, this wasn't really planned to have the challenges start at different times. We're actually quite curious now how this is going to be, how this is going to unfold.
Could you give maybe a bit more details on what is the baseline that you provided?
Sure. Tobias, could you go back to the baseline slide? Let's see, right here. So yeah, like Tobias was saying just a second ago, the baseline follows the retrieval and re-ranking paradigm. The model that we're actually using is a model published by some of my colleagues here. It features both global and local features. And so you get a single image feature and a whole bunch of key points and descriptors out of it. And we are first doing basically the same thing that we did in our retrieval pipeline. Then selecting, I think in our baseline, we selected the top 10 just for like to fit within runtime constraints. We're applying geometric verification through Ransack and then inlier-based re-ranking. So we reorder them based on a combination of their global feature similarity and the number of inliers. And then we then sum them up in a way that that aggregates per label. So if you have like two images that have the same class, they will, like it will roll into the first image that was ranked, and then we select the first ranked image for the label that we output to the scoring. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So I see that it's the ECCV 20 paper that's mentioned there. So it's the method in the paper that combines both global and local descriptors, and it's the model trained in the paper, right?
I think so. Yes.
So it's quite a strong baseline.
It is.
So,
yeah.
I can provide a little more detail. So it's actually the ResNet 50 model, so not the ResNet 101. So actually, we just released the ResNet 101 model like 2 days ago. So people may just replace that in the kernel that Cam developed for the baseline for the competition actually, and get even a stronger performance potentially. But another interesting point to mention here, Yorgos, is that we could not directly just reuse exactly the method from the paper because of the time constraint. So there was not enough time to actually re-rank 100 images per query. So Cam, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like 10 images that we re-rank currently?
Right. Yeah, we limited it to 10 just to make sure we were always fitting within that time constraint. It could probably be upped slightly, but yeah, with our current performance and constraints, I don't think we could fit the whole 100.
Yeah. And yeah, another interesting point to mention is that to use fast geometric verification, we for the DAO code base, actually we use the one from SciPy, the common library for Python. But for geometric verification here, we found the PyDigenSec library to be a lot faster. So Cam did a lot of experiments with that as well, and we ended up using that library, which is I guess developed by some people in CTU Prague as well. So yeah.
I had a quick question. So how did you handle this out of domain query image? For example, if I upload the image does not contain any landmark, how do you handle that?
I mean, it's up to
Correct me if I'm. Oh, go ahead.
It's up to the participants to handle it. But last year we saw people developing classifiers that, basically training landmark, non-landmark classifiers that are run before any pipeline, and only if they say this might be a landmark, then the full model would be run.
Are you asking about the metric, Shu, or are you asking about how the method would work in that case, or?
The method.
Yeah,
it's more like the method.
Yeah, the method will provide a score for that image, and the metric that we're using takes into account that score. So ideally, what the method should do is assign a really, really low score if the image does not show any landmark in the training set. So yeah, that's what it should do. So usually what will happen is the embedding similarity will be low. The local feature matching will produce either no inliers or a very low number of inliers.
And even if we do, sorry, I was going to say, even if we do end up matching against an image that does not have an associated label, so it's like a distractor image, it won't have a label. So if that's like the top ranking one, right, and we select that, it'll be returned as like nothing. But we're not doing any explicit removal of matching distractors in the baseline.